วันนี้โลกเราไม่ได้แข่งกันแค่การพัฒนา AI ที่ฉลาดที่สุดหรือชิปที่ทรงพลังที่สุดแต่แข่งกันหาพลังงานที่ทั้งสะอาดและเสถียรตลอด 24 ชั่วโมงมารองรับการเติบโตของอุตสาหกรรม AI Data Center ที่กำลังสูบพลังงานโลกอย่างมหาศาลค่ะแต่ว่า AI ไม่ใช่แค่ปัจจัยเดียวเรายังมีโจทย์ใหญ่อย่างเป้าหมาย Net Zero ที่จะต้องลดการปล่อยคาร์บอนเพื่อสู้กับโลกรวนและยังมีวิกฤตพลังงานที่ทำให้ทุกประเทศต้องเปลี่ยนผ่านพลังงานเร็วขึ้นเทคโนโลยีที่หลายคนเคยกลัวอย่างพลังงานนิวเคลียร์จึงกลับมาได้รับความสนใจอีกครั้งแล้วประเทศไทยอยู่ตรงไหนในเกมนี้เรารู้จักเทคโนโลยีนี้ดีแค่ไหนมีเรื่องอะไรที่ต้องรู้บ้างถ้าไทยจะสร้างโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์
So who you choose to work with, you enter into what we call the 100-year marriage. It's unacceptable anywhere, but it's particularly unacceptable in the nuclear sector. So if any society wants to come together and pursue nuclear power, this must be a corruption-free industry, because one bad actor can ruin it for everybody.
ช่วงนี้อาจจะเต็มไปด้วยคำถามเรื่องของพลังงานนิวเคลียร์แต่อีกด้านหนึ่งเต็มไปด้วยความกลัวเช่นเดียวกันเพราะว่าเมื่อพูดถึงนิวเคลียร์ก็อาจจะมีความกลัวเรื่องอุบัติเหตุครั้งใหญ่เรื่องของกัมมันตภาพรังสีหรือการกำจัดขยะจากนิวเคลียร์แต่ทั้งหมดนี้ก็คงปฏิเสธไม่ได้นะคะว่าเราไม่สามารถที่จะหลีกเลี่ยงการพูดถึงโครงการพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ได้โดยเฉพาะในสถานการณ์ที่ภูมิรัฐศาสตร์กำลังเผชิญการแข่งขันกันอย่างเข้มข้นมีสงครามทำให้วาระเรื่องความมั่นคงทางพลังงานกลับมาสู่ความสนใจในเวทีระดับโลกและระดับประเทศอีกครั้งหนึ่ง The World Dialogue วันนี้เราจะคุยกับผู้เชี่ยวชาญเรื่องของพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ค่ะอาจารย์ไมเคิลช็อตจากสถาบัน MIT ค่ะปัจจุบันผู้นำหลายประเทศได้ออกมาประกาศแผนฟื้นฟูและเดินหน้าโครงการพลังงานนิวเคลียร์กันอย่างจริงจังทั้งสหรัฐอเมริกาสหราชอาณาจักรญี่ปุ่นเกาหลีใต้แม้แต่ผู้นำสหภาพยุโรปยังยอมรับว่าการลดบทบาทพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ในอดีตเป็นการตัดสินใจที่ผิดพลาดหลังจากเผชิญกับปัญหาพลังงานจากสงครามยูเครนรัสเซียและถูกวิกฤตพลังงานปีนี้ซ้ำเติมอีกครั้งยิ่งตอกย้ำว่าโลกจะหันมาเอาจริงกับพลังงานนิวเคลียร์และไม่ได้มองว่านิวเคลียร์เป็นแค่พลังงานทางเลือกเพื่อสิ่งแวดล้อมอย่างเดียวอีกต่อไป Professor Michael Schott, thank you very much for joining me. We met the first time in January. Back then, the world was discussing about energy in transition. But a bit later, we have got the Middle East war.And it means that right now the world focus on energy security. What has changed the course of nuclear power?
Back then, we talked a lot about the need for every country, including Thailand, to have domestic energy security. In January, there was no war in the Middle East, but I remember saying something to the lines of, you never know what's going to happen, you never know when it's going to happen, and 1 month later, look what happened. So I think that this has shown a lot of countries that they can't depend on foreign imports of any kind of energy.Or else they have not just price hikes, but fuel shortages. I mean, I've heard here that there were lines at the petrol stations 24 hours all of a sudden. And so I think what this has done is put nuclear power even further into public debate, because when a country has a nuclear program, they have control over that program, either partial or full, and it's a good source of domestic energy security.
Some even mention that this time, currently, it's nuclear renaissance.Is this a real renaissance of nuclear power?
Yeah, I do think that this is the real renaissance. I mean, if you think of the word root renaissance, it means born again. And we are seeing a lot of nuclear capabilities being born again from countries that had taken nuclear power off the table that are now putting it on. Like if you look at Japan's last 5-year plan, which was to reduce nuclear as quick as possible, their current plan is to increase nuclear as quick as possible.The US has historically been a great builder of nuclear, stopped doing it for a couple decades, and they've now completed their first large nuclear plants in quite a while. China has become the undisputed leader in new nuclear builds. So we're seeing the skills and the society's efforts reborn. So I do believe it's a renaissance because it is a rebirth of the skills and determination from before.
นอกจากรัฐบาลแต่ละประเทศจะขยับตัวกันแล้ว Big Tech ระดับโลกยังกระโดดลงมาเล่นในสนาม SMR หรือเครื่องปฏิกรณ์นิวเคลียร์ขนาดเล็กกันเองเพราะว่าการเติบโตแบบก้าวกระโดดของ AI ทำให้ Data Center ต้องการพลังงานมหาศาล SMR เลยเข้ามาเปลี่ยนเกมพลังงานเพราะตอบโจทย์การผลิตพลังงานคาร์บอนต่ำที่เสถียร 24 ชั่วโมงแถมสร้างได้ไวขนาดก็เล็กกว่าจนตั้งไว้ใกล้ๆ Data Center ได้แต่พอเราพูดถึงนิวเคลียร์หลายคนก็ยังนึกถึงระเบิดอยู่ดี In Thailand, people tend to think of nuclear as bomb. What's the difference between nuclear power and nuclear weapon?
A nuclear power is a controlled reaction. A nuclear weapon is by definition a fast as possible, uncontrolled reaction. A nuclear power plant can never explode like a bomb. A nuclear bomb relies on a very, very fast nuclear chain reaction, which greatly increases its power with the maximum energy yield. Even nuclear accidents like Chernobyl were not a bomb. This caused a huge fire, and that was the world's worst nuclear accident. Accidents like Fukushima, there was an explosion, but it was a chemical hydrogen explosion. So it's important to understand what we're talking about. A nuclear power plant cannot become a nuclear bomb. The enrichment is too low. You cannot actually make a nuclear weapon out of this 5% enriched uranium. In fact, there are international limits on the enrichment level of uranium to prevent anyone from even making a weapon. This is about 20% or low enriched uranium. If any country starts enriching beyond 20%, that's suspicious. And any country that has signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and agreed to safeguards shouldn't be doing this.
For you as a scientist who've been working in this issue for probably more than 20 years, do you think it's a safe option for a country to think of energy for the future?
I think it's among the safest option. When you look at the data for how safe is each source of energy, you look at the number of deaths caused by that source of energy and divide by the amount of good it did, the amount of power it produced. Nuclear, wind, and solar are the same. Nuclear is as safe as solar. Solar is as safe as nuclear. Just that the accidents look very different. But when you sum up the number of people that have died because of solar power or wind power or nuclear power, they're very similar. All three of them, these are the big three clean energy sources. These are the big three safe energy sources. And the best, if somebody asked me which one would you choose, all three. There's security and energy diversity. As a person who studied nuclear materials all my life, I would never advocate a country going 100% nuclear power. I think that's risky, not from the point of safety, but from the point of energy security.
Also, another term which has been mentioned very often nowadays in Thailand as well, it's SMR, small modular reactors.
Yep.
What is it and what is its role instead of a nuclear power plant?
SMR, or small modular reactor, is a type of nuclear power plant. Small. This usually means 300 megawatts or less, which is a pretty small power plant compared to the large ones, which can be over 1,000 megawatts. The M stands for modular. And when you make a reactor that's much smaller, the components shrink too, and they become a lot easier to fabricate. And so the promise of these small modular reactors is more components can be bought off the shelf, more of them can be made off-site and assembled off-site, rather than putting everything together there. And the promise is that we can learn how to build them a lot quicker. We can learn, as we build each one, we get better and better and better, and get the cost down quicker and quicker. But because there's been very few produced so far, it's a little too early to tell. Luckily, there are enough companies and enough countries that are taking that first chance. We're starting to build some in the US. There's a few just started construction in Canada. China's already constructed and turned one on. And so we're going to get that data in the next few years to find out, do the SMRs live up to their promise? It's not going to take long to find out.
หันกลับมาดูที่ไทยกันบ้างรัฐบาลกำลังผลักดันร่างแผนพัฒนากำลังการผลิตไฟฟ้าปี 2569 ถึง 2593 หรือร่างแผน PDP 2026 ในร่างแผนนี้มีการวางเป้าหมายการผลิตไฟฟ้าจากพลังงานสะอาดถึง 70%เ พื่อรองรับความต้องการใช้ไฟฟ้าที่เพิ่มขึ้นที่สำคัญยังมีการพิจารณานำร่องพัฒนาโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์ขนาดเล็กหรือ SMR ปริมาณ 2,400 เมกะวัตต์ซึ่งเพิ่มขึ้นจากแผน PDP 2024 ที่กำหนดไว้เพียง 600 เมกะวัตต์เท่านั้นอย่างไรก็ตามมีหลายภาคส่วนที่แสดงความกังวลเกี่ยวกับมาตรฐานความปลอดภัยของ SMR เนื่องจากยังไม่เคยมีการติดตั้งมาก่อนในไทยและใช้งานเพียงไม่กี่ประเทศทั่วโลก
The thing is, in Thailand, it's having discussion that probably the way for Thailand is to have SMR instead of having a big nuclear power plant. Can it be replaced one another? What's your take on this?
The decision of what size power plant to make is definitely a decision for Thailand to make for itself, balancing quite a few factors. And SMR certainly will not necessarily be as cost effective as a large plant. When you have a large plant, the cost of electricity is on average going to be a little bit cheaper. Now, many factors go into that. It's how well the plant is run, what the design is, how many have been built before. So it's not a simple question of which is cheaper, because when you start to make your money back also matters a lot. How much money you can invest in the plant also matters a lot. And starting by building an SMR does not stop you from building a big one later. In fact, I would put forth that if you wanted to start with an SMR, you might be able to get one built sooner and start gaining operating experience, training operators, getting people used to the idea of having a reactor in Thailand, so that if you decide to build a big one, you'll have a lot more experience in not just how to build them, but how to run them. There are a lot of large companies that are operating data centers that are placing orders for SMRs, even when they're not fully designed yet. They see this as the future. Because if you want your electricity carbon-free, which I think we agree that we do, and you want it to be reliable, it's great to have one reactor, one customer, 100% uptime. And then you've got this power purchase agreement between the owner and the consumer. You might even have the owner and the consumer be the same entity. There's lots of models for how this could run, but a lot of large companies that run data centers are getting very excited about SMRs because then they can have their own carbon-free personal power source.
Does that mean that a data center project can have SMR alongside their site to supply electricity and power to that data center?
It does. And part of the reason for this is that the planning zone, what's called the EPZ, the emergency planning zone around an SMR, can be much, much smaller than around a large reactor. A large reactor often requires a large emergency planning zone. If anything goes wrong, you have to have a plan for what to do in the case that this happens. But we now have legal precedent in the US that for a small SMR, it could be the site boundary. We're talking just a few hundred meters around, which means co-location with a data center, with a chemical processing plant, with a hydrogen production facility looks a lot more feasible than it used to.
For a country like Thailand, what's the problem that nuclear power plant can solve? Like, are we going to have cleaner electricity, cheaper electricity, or energy security, or even national security?
So I'll start with the easiest one of those. Cleaner electricity. That's an absolute yes. Nuclear power is among the cleanest sources of energy there is, and that's even counting the carbon emissions from the concrete that used to pour it and the issue of nuclear waste, which I'm sure we'll get into a little later in this interview. In terms of energy security, yes. Now, I realize Thailand may not have a huge resource of its own uranium, but depending on which vendors and which countries you go with, you're producing your own power. And you may have uranium imports, but these are things that you can certainly stockpile up, or ASEAN collaboration of some kind, I think remains to be seen. In terms of cheaper electricity, that remains to be seen. Now, I can give you a couple of examples. The new nuclear plants that have been built in the US and the rest of Europe, they've been pretty expensive. And a lot of detractors of nuclear say, oh, this is proof that nuclear is too expensive. But we have counterproof. The units that were built in the United Arab Emirates, the Baraka units, were built at about half the cost of the units in the West. So we have modern examples where nuclear was too expensive and where nuclear was quite cheap. It depends on who's building it. It depends on the experience they have in managing these huge, complex engineering projects and lots of other factors. So I think nuclear does have the potential to be quite cheap. The old expression, too cheap to meter, I don't think so. That was a sales tactic that didn't pan out. but it can absolutely compete with gas and renewables in some situations.
ตอนนี้เราพร้อมแค่ไหนศาสตราจารย์ไมเคิลชอตมองว่าการสร้างโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์ไม่ใช่โครงการที่ทำได้ในรัฐบาลชุดเดียวแต่คือการตัดสินใจเลือกพาร์ทเนอร์ที่อาจจะต้องอยู่กับประเทศไปอีกเกือบ100ปีและถ้ามีเรื่องเดียวที่อาจทำให้โครงการนี้ล้มเหลวได้ไม่ใช่เรื่องเทคโนโลยีไม่ใช่เรื่องราคาแต่คือคอร์รัปชัน
If you see that nuclear power is safe, why does it take so long for some countries and it face delay, cause overrun or political resistance?
A lot of people are against nuclear power. And this comes from any amount of lack of information, mistrust, video and movies of accidents in the past, coverage in the media, misrepresentations in the media, or just generally feeling left out of the conversation. That last one to me is the most important. Nuclear power had been pursued by quite a lot of countries without, in my opinion, enough time for public comment. So this is the history of nuclear power. We were all excited about it in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of countries went forward with it. People were told it was safe and too cheap to meter, and then all you need is one accident to dispel that vision and to show people, hey, I was right. It's not exactly what people told me it was. And so that's where a lot of this public resistance comes from. It's a very understandable and legitimate fear from being sold something and a little bit oversold.
For a country, Thailand, for example, in building large infrastructure project or big building project, people tend to have doubt because of weakening governance, corruption, or public trust in the institution is so low. What's your view on this?
This is something that needs to be fixed, and this is going to take political and societal will. So without commenting on the level of corruption in any country, I'll say that it's unacceptable in the nuclear sector, right? It's unacceptable anywhere, but it's particularly unacceptable in the nuclear sector. So if any society wants to come together and pursue nuclear power, this must be a corruption-free industry because one bad actor can ruin it for everybody. Let's say for the case of Thailand, you could, for example, follow the UAE model and bring in an experienced fabricator like Korea to help build these ones and show how it's done. But keeping the supply chain nuclear qualified, sticking to the standards and the drawings, not deviating, not cutting corners, this is so important in this industry, and it can happen. It's just a matter of will the people in charge enforce and ensure that nothing gets skipped, no corners get cut, no corruption gets let in. It's so important here.
So it means the whole process need to be open to the public for information, for public discussion.
Yes, transparency is the name of the game in a nuclear program. This is something I can say the US does very well. In fact, the worldwide nuclear industry generally does this very well. If any nuclear plant has any minor problem, it's reported to an international agency, root cause analyses are done, and every plant can learn from the experience of every other one. And the fact that every single filing, like to the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is a matter of public record. Public hearings for whether or not to build a nuclear plant and updates on status are open to the public.
In terms of workforce involving in nuclear power plant, not only the beginning, but the whole process of running it, who are experts in the workforce that Thailand need, like nuclear scientists, local communities, lawyers?
It takes a lot of different kinds of people to build and operate and decommission a nuclear power plant. And most of them are not nuclear engineers. You will absolutely need nuclear engineers to do analysis for anything that happens, but you're going to need water chemists to look at the water chemistry and make sure that corrosion doesn't get too bad. You'll need material scientists to check the health of the materials and prevent things like cracking. You're going to need absolutely lawyers to deal with all of the legal filings and challenges to come. You'll need experts in policy and regulation. Anytime you want to make a change, anytime you have to report something, you have to do it right.
If Thailand would like to go ahead with a nuclear power plant, who are or what kind of talents that we should nurture as of now?
My first step would be to talk to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA. They have a lot of guidance and projects on nuclear workforce development. And they're part of the UN. They're an organization that serves all the member countries. And they do talk about what would it take to build a nuclear program, not just the physical and the technical stuff, but the workforce, the societal stuff, everything like that. So starting with them is the way to go. Then it comes to the universities, the trade schools, even down to secondary school. You'll want everyone to have some knowledge of radiation and nuclear power. You'll want people that can do nuclear welding, inspection, non-destructive testing, analysis, water chemistry sampling, like I mentioned before. The right time to start is now, because it might take 10 years to fully build out the nuclear workforce. Now, luckily, it's probably going to be 10 years before you turn on your first reactor, and that's a fairly optimistic target if you decide to do so, right? All of this is contingent upon the decision of the Thai people. I should mention too, my goal is not to tell you you should pursue nuclear power. And by the way, building a nuclear workforce does not commit you to a nuclear power program. It means you're preparing for the possibility.
ตอนนี้หลายประเทศในอาเซียนเริ่มขยับแล้วทั้งเวียดนามที่มีความร่วมมือกับรัสเซียฟิลิปปินส์มีความร่วมมือด้านนิวเคลียร์พลเมืองกับสหรัฐแล้วเราควรเลือกพาร์ทเนอร์แบบไหน If Thailand want to choose partners in going ahead with the nuclear power plants, what are the factors that Thailand should take cautious calculation?
To me, the factors in choosing with whom to work are equal parts technological and political. So who you choose to work with, whichever company you choose to work with and whichever country it comes from, is a technical decision and it's a big political decision. You enter into what we call the 100-year marriage, which means that when you work with another country's nuclear program, they have some political strings to pull with you. What I would suggest is that you work with two. And the reason for this is because it's a political decision and because working with any country carries political ramifications. Not just adding nuclear for domestic energy security, but having two partners to confirm that nuclear domestic energy security means no one country has full sway over the state of your nuclear program. I think when it comes to knowledge building and transfer, the door should be wide open. Thailand should learn from the best that everybody has, and there's great aspects about every current country's nuclear program. When it comes to who to choose to design and build and operate the plants, nothing says it has to be two. My only suggestion is that it's more than one.
Overall, with this geopolitical risk in this fragmented world, how do you see the dynamic of nuclear power being changed in the past 6 months also?
What's happened in the Strait of Hormuz, I think, has shifted a lot of the discussions, and the discussions shift the balance of power. So, for example, the idea that stability is here and it's always going to be here is kind of out the window. That shift towards the need for domestic energy security, I think, is quite important. That's the kind of event that makes me think, for example, Thailand needs two partners. I'm not sure I would have said so before. And that is a pretty political decision, right? Because you're foregoing the concentration of expertise in one technology for the optionality to have two political partners. That has a cost, but it also has a real tangible benefit.
If we look at regional perspective, we see how different countries are pressing ahead with nuclear power projects like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia. It's more active in the US, France, China as well. What is the scenario you are seeing as many countries are very active in terms of nuclear power at this moment?
It's been an interesting few years in that a lot of the ASEAN countries are starting to make movements and announcements that they're either considering nuclear power or that they're pursuing nuclear power. ASEAN needs to move together, in my opinion. Now, every country has a sovereign right to pursue their own policies and their own nuclear power program, but I think they should be incentivized to work together because an issue anywhere is an issue everywhere, especially in a very population-dense region like ASEAN. So I would hope that there would be some common safety framework where any member state of ASEAN could have either their own inspectors or a third-party international inspector certify and verify that their neighboring nuclear power programs are indeed as safe as they hope.
Is Thailand at risk of falling behind while other countries are being active in terms of pursuing nuclear power?
I don't think Thailand is at risk of falling behind yet, as long as you start to collect the information and make your decisions soon. So you've not missed the chance. Absolutely not. Because a lot of these announcements have come in just the past couple of years, and it takes more than a couple of years to build a nuclear program. So in my opinion, you absolutely still have time to carefully consider and make the decision for Thailand. I don't know if I would wait 20 years though. I think in the next few years, Thailand should really consider carefully, review the technologies, get public comment and opinion, and make a careful consideration of whether this is right for Thailand.
Have you got example of nuclear power in other countries? Who are their partners in running this large-scale project?
There are certainly a lot of interesting new developments in terms of who's working with whom in other countries. For example, before the Fukushima incident, Vietnam was set to work with Russia and Japan. Now, the accident kind of scuttled those things, but that's an example where one country was going to work with two of them. We've seen other things like Uzbekistan is going with Russia. There's a lot of historical and cultural ties there. So again, there's familiarity with the technology. There's familiarity. They were both part of the Soviet Union. Canada is going to start building a few US technologies that might have something to do with proximity and cultural similarity. It might not. I wasn't the part of the project to decide.
For example, the project in Myanmar, it makes some Thai people very much aware and feeling like fear of what Myanmar is pursuing, especially they are partnering with Russia of doing this nuclear power plant project. What should be the factors that Thailand be aware of next door project?
Just the fact that there's a lot of fear about this project underscores that this is both a technical and a political decision. Technically speaking, Russia has run a pretty successful nuclear program. They've been quite innovative in terms of the materials and reactor designs that they've used. I think the fear comes a lot from the political side because of what's going on right now in Ukraine and what's happened in Crimea and what Russia has done to a lot of its neighbors and has threatened to do to a lot of its other neighbors. That fear of having a political bargaining chip with a country is real, right? The Russian nuclear program is pretty strong, but the place of Russia on the international stage right now is pretty volatile.
สุดท้ายไม่ว่าเราจะเลือกทางไหนทุกทางก็มีความเสี่ยง
Nuclear promises to produce large amounts of carbon-free, domestic, clean, and safe energy. So do other methods of power production. There is no option that involves no risk, and that includes doing nothing. Because the risk of doing nothing is you don't meet your energy needs, the lights go off, the aircon goes off, people start to die. So nothing good ever came easy, and absolutely nothing worth doing comes without risk.
ถ้าไทยตัดสินใจสร้างเราต้องการแก้ปัญหาเชิงโครงสร้างความโปร่งใสกฎหมายและการจัดการกับกากนิวเคลียร์ให้ได้
One more great concern is about nuclear waste.
Sure.
What should be the factors that Thailand take consideration? Like, should we have repository one in the country?
I'm not the one that's the right person to say what Thailand should do. But what I can tell you is there's a few models for how to handle the waste. In the US, we have above ground dry cask storage. We have our nuclear waste in very strong steel and concrete canisters, and it's been sitting on the sites of the nuclear plants for decades, and it's been fine. In many other countries, they build underground repositories, put the waste in geologically stable places that haven't moved in terms of the rock movement more than millimeters in hundreds of millions of years. It doesn't mean it won't move tomorrow, but the chances are extremely low. There are also nuclear designs that are being exported today that are designed to sit offshore, float offshore from a company, provide power to the grid, and then when the nuclear fuel is spent, ship it back to the host country. So there are models where Thailand can have nuclear power without producing nuclear waste. It's going to cost more, but then it's up to Thailand to decide is the added cost of paying for someone else's waste disposal worth not having a repository in country. That's a decision only the Thai people can make.
แต่ถ้าเราเลือกที่จะไม่ทำอะไรเลยต่อไปเราอาจจะต้องนำเข้าพลังงานนี้จากประเทศเพื่อนบ้านแทน
Let's say we're in a scenario where many of Thailand's neighbors end up producing nuclear power and Thailand decides not to. We've seen examples where too heavy of a renewable powered grid doesn't tend to work, right? We've seen the cases in Spain and California, where there's too much power sometimes, not enough when you sometimes need it, and that a purely renewable grid doesn't work in every situation. I believe that any large enough country, and that includes Thailand, that decides not to pursue nuclear power is increasing the chance that you'll be dependent on energy imports. And as we've seen, being dependent on energy imports puts you at risk of domestic energy security.
Or is it the risk of Thailand the other way around, that we can be dumping ground of nuclear waste if we do not pursue nuclear power plant on our own?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we can become dumping ground of nuclear waste.
Dumping ground is not the word I would use. If you choose to accept nuclear waste, then you would become a waste acceptor, right? And you should get paid for it. But the benefits of accepting nuclear waste without generating nuclear power are purely economic and political. I wouldn't make that kind of decision. So I would think that I would not advise any country to just sit there and accept nuclear waste if they weren't producing some of it. Because then the real tangible benefits to society are purely economical, a little bit political. That doesn't sound worth it to me.
การตัดสินใจเรื่องการเดินหน้าพลังงานนิวเคลียร์สำหรับประเทศไทยยังอาจจะพอมีเวลานะคะแต่ก็ต้องเป็นการตัดสินใจที่ต้องอาศัยความร่วมมือและให้ความรู้กับทุกภาคส่วนค่ะเพราะว่านี่จะเป็นโครงการขนาดใหญ่มีผลในระยะยาวโดยเฉพาะเมื่ออาจารย์ไมเคิลชอตย้ำว่าจะเท่ากับเป็นการแต่งงานที่อาจจะมีอายุยืนยาวนับร้อยปีเพราะฉะนั้นการศึกษาทั้งข้อดีข้อเสียความเป็นไปได้ผลลัพธ์ต่างๆที่จะเกิดขึ้นจากโครงการพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ย่อมมีความสำคัญอย่างยิ่งยวดแต่ก็ต้องไม่ลืมเรื่องของการสร้างความมั่นคงทางพลังงานให้กับประเทศไทยด้วยค่ะและทั้งหมดก็คือ The World Dialogue สำหรับวันนี้ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ